Hi, it's Gita and welcome to Practical Civics. On September 18th, President Trump signed a proclamation declaring Constitution Week. As we begin to celebrate 250 years of American independence next year, President Trump called on teachers, administrators, and state and local leaders to actively teach about the Constitution for a week every single year. We here at Answer the Question think that's a great idea. So this is the first in a series of videos this month, which will take a deep dive into this important founding document of the United States. The Constitution is now a 235-year-old document, and most Americans, in fact, most people around the world, know what it is generally, and they know that it specifies the law of the land here in the United States. But what exactly does it say, and is it still relevant today? The U.S. Constitution wasn't our founding fathers' first attempt at creating a document which specified the governing principles for a fledgling new nation. The first attempt was a document called the Articles of Confederation, which was ratified in 1781, and it deliberately created a very weak central government. Because our founders were so fearful of replicating what they considered the tyranny of the British Crown, they initially created a governing body that was very weak from a central standpoint. This original founding document gave the central government no power to tax states or citizens, no ability to raise armies, and no ability to regulate interstate commerce. Unfortunately, this led to crippling debt, economic chaos, and states acting as kind of hostile member nations instead of a unified collection of individual states with common interests. Perhaps the defining moment that highlighted the weakness of this first document was Shays' Rebellion, which took place from 1786 to 1787. This was an uprising by rural farmers in Massachusetts. Many of these farmers were actually Revolutionary War veterans, but they were debt-ridden and struggling to hold on to their farmland. So they staged a revolt, but because of the federal government's lack of power to raise an army, it took them a long time, over a year, to actually put the revolt down. This inability to maintain domestic order prompted leaders like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton to call for a constitutional congress in Philadelphia in 1787. It was at this convention that the original framers of the United States abandoned the Articles of Confederation and began to frame a new constitution featuring a strong federal system with the power to tax, raise armies, and enforce laws. We, the people of the United States, those are the famous first few words of the preamble to the United States Constitution. What the preamble does is it lays out 6 goals or purposes for the establishment of a new U.S. Constitution. So what are those goals and what do they actually mean? Goal number 1 is to form a more perfect union, meaning to create a more cohesive and effective central government than the one they had established under the original Articles of Confederation. Goal number 2 was to establish justice, meaning to ensure a fair and equitable system of laws and courts. Goal number 3 was to ensure domestic tranquility, meaning to maintain peace and order within the country. This was a direct response to Shays' Rebellion. Goal number 4 was to provide for the common defense. This specifically meant to protect the country from foreign threats. Goal number 5 was to promote the general welfare, meaning to ensure the well-being of the population of these new United States of America. Goal number 6 read to secure the blessings of liberty, to protect ourselves and our posterity. What that meant is to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of all citizens, both then and for future generations. The Constitution had very specific language about the limits of power. It established the rule of law, saying that everyone is subject to and accountable under the law. It called for limited government, with government powers defined and restricted by the law. And it called for federalism, with a division of power between the national or federal government and the state governments. These limits on government powers aren't included in one single section of the Constitution. Rather, they're spread throughout the text. The limits on government power are partially spelled out in Articles 1, 2, and 3, which establish the separate branches of government and establish the separation of powers. The 10th Amendment, which is included in the Bill of Rights, specifically reserves powers not delegated to the federal government to be reserved by the states. And the principle of the rule of law, which holds that everyone, including government officials, is subject to and accountable under the law, is established in a couple of different areas. Number 1 is the Supremacy Clause, which is contained in Article 6. It declares the Constitution and federal laws to be the, quote, supreme law of the land, meaning all state and federal officials are subject to it. The Due Process Clause, which is contained in the 5th and 14th Amendments, require that the government must act fairly and observe established rules when depriving someone of life, liberty, or property. The first 3 articles of the Constitution, 1, 2, and 3, establish the 3 branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary branch. And in our next video, we'll dive into Article 1 and the powers granted to the legislative branch.